everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mike's, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day, and our co-sponsor CardHoarder.com, offering the best inventory, prices, and delivery of cards for Magic Online. I am Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Aaron Campbell.
Hey girl, hey.
Ruben Bressler.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Well, how you doing?
I'm doing well. As you can see, I'm swimming in an ocean of macaroons.
I'm hungry just looking at you.
This is quite the setup that I have this week. My mom is visiting me here in Las Vegas, and so I'm in the hotel suite that she has recording this one because she was only in town for like 24 hours and we were hanging out. So, and we had this delightful macaroon-themed backdrop. So why not use that to our advantage?
It's not every day you get to have, baked goods behind you, enlarged.
Right.
It's terrific. Also, and for those who are listening to the podcast, he literally has giant macaroon wallpaper. It's amazing. But we have a Kickstarter coming up.
Yes.
On Wednesday night for our Wednesday night live show. As the show goes live, so shall the Kickstarter go live, and we'll cross our fingers and hope that people like us and stuff and want to complete set review of Dominaria. And
right. So as you watch this video, if you're watching this before 11 p.m. on February 28th, 2018, then the Kickstarter's not up yet. But if it's after, in that 3 weeks period that we have, 2 weeks, I don't know how long we have the Kickstarter going
for a couple weeks. And
go take a look at it. And if you're watching this years in the future, hopefully we did that.
Hopefully it's like, oh, look at them. They thought they could do it. Yeah, see, that's where we're at right here is we're hoping we're in that space.
Right.
But that said, so we also begin with our choice of top comment from last week. Now, note, in a segment of that word doesn't mean what you think it means, prolific is not the word I should be using here. Prolific usually means a lot of, and not necessarily, the stuff that you have a lot of isn't that great. Now, note that the synonyms, and I was looking here, the present in large numbers or quantities. Now, the synonyms are like luxuriant, rich, and lush. That to me is what I'm thinking when I say
so
prolific.
We're looking for the lushest comment.
The luscious, most not copious. See, that's another word. It's not bad.
See, that's another one for a lot. What we're looking for is quality over
quality comments with insightful,
luxuriant is a good one. We're looking for the most luxuriant content.
Wow.
Well, this week's most luxuriant commentator, as I steal your segue away from you, came from Joseph S., who wrote of our Sleepers top 10s. To my mind, no list of sleeper cards is complete without Psychotog. This card was so underrated that people literally used it as a proxy for Shadow Mage Infiltrator. And only during playtesting did folks realize they'd actually prefer to have the Psychotog after all. It was so good that it overshadowed John Finkel's Invitational card and saw play in every major constructed format. Humorously, Psychotog is also featured on the art of the Onslaught version of Shock, which is incredibly misleading because there ain't no self-respecting Psychotog that ever fell to a measly 2 damage.
This is true. That was a really weird thing to put on Shock.
And that's a pretty good sleeper card because that did not have any hullabaloo when the set came out. The colorless blue and black creature that got all of the press was Shadow Mage Infiltrator, and for good reason. But a couple months later, maybe even a couple weeks later, and people who were like, well, we could deal a damage or draw a card, but turns out if these were just actual Psychotogs, they'd be dead this turn. And so Psychotog took over. There were a lot of great comments this week about a bunch of good sleepers from the past.
Shout out to the young man who did the Bedlam Reveler went down to Georgia or something.
Nice.
Just because I asked him to. So he had started off the comment and I was like, oh no, girl, if you're going to come here, you need to come. And then 10 minutes later, he was like, all right, let me clear my throat. And then he did it and it was marvelous.
Yeah. Lots of great comments this week. Lots of really good sleepers from the past. But I really like Joseph's entry.
Fair enough. So if you too have a luxuriant thought
of
a card that we did not choose for our honorable mention, please leave it below. And
I am a luxuriant thought.
Yeah.
THOT, though, is the...
Right.
All right.
Like THICC is your thing? All right, got it. Fair enough. So it's really tough. This week we're doing non-creature artifacts because I've just felt like if we just say artifacts, we're already non-creature artifacts. We're already looking at 1,200 cards. It was unbelievably painful. I picked out 40 for this top 10, and that's just alone. So with that said, go ahead and sort of define how your list is formed. I really think we kind of need a little bit of a preface, because I feel I do. Erin, what's your number 10, and where were you sort of going with this list?
I think I followed just my usual template where sort of, 10 through 6 were kind of the cards that maybe had some success or that I just kind of have emotional attachments to. And then 5 through 1 were sort of the really, really good ones that have seen play in multiple formats or just sort of skyrocketed to the top in terms of being good in vintage. And so my number 10, I have a great emotional attachment to. I'm a big fan of randomness. I happen to enjoy decks where, variance giveth and variance taketh away. Sometimes you're on the end of some bad dredges where you will go through 3/4 of your deck and never see a Narcomoeba, and sometimes that happens. Or you will cast the Spoils of the Vault and kill yourself because you don't find your win conditions, Or sometimes you get lucky and it's the first card on top, or sometimes you only dredge 6 and find 3 Narcomoebas. And so I really appreciate randomness, and my number 10 really embodies randomness. And it also is a shout out to a beloved character in Magic history who we're going to be revisiting in Dominaria. My number 10 is Teferi's Puzzle Box. So it's 4 colorless. It's an artifact. During each player's draw phase, that player counts the cards in their hand, puts those cards on the bottom of their library, and then draws that number of cards. And I really like this because, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You may have just some dead cards in your hand and you want to put them on the bottom and draw some gas. Or your opponent may have a great hand and they're like, I was looking to keep that, and they can't keep that anymore. And so I really appreciate the way that it sort of lets you filter through your deck in an uncommon way. That's not in a Merfolk Looter way or not in a Bazaar of Baghdad way where you're simply drawing and discarding. You're literally just kind of shuffling through your deck. And I also love the nod to puzzle boxes or Rubik's Cubes. Shout out to, I think it was Hellraiser. That was the movie with the puzzle box,
Yeah.
And so I really love this card, and I love Teferi, and I'm anxious to get back and see what he's been up to. And I just feel like this card really embodies me, and this is a big personal favorite when I first started playing the game.
Yeah, I had a casual Underworld Dreams Teferi's Puzzle Box, like I'm sure a lot of people did when I first started playing. Teferi's Puzzle Box is a great one.
Shout out to Kaya Foglio for the art.
Of course.
Oh, yeah, the original one back in Visions. Yeah, I mean, this card was sweet. No one really knew what to do with this. Like, Underworld Dreams was still like a weird Legends thing. So, like, we can't do something with that. But once, there was a period of time where that deck actually could be played.
Yeah,
it was silly. It was like tier 3.5 or something.
Yeah, it was like 7th edition, I think, was legal, and you could, and both, or maybe it was 8th edition.
I think it was 8th,
both those cards were legal, and you could theoretically play a deck that had that combo in it, and that was a delight.
Yeah.
So, Ruben, what's your number 10?
So my list, again, you're just overwhelmed by the possibilities of non-creature artifacts. There's so many artifacts, and a lot of them honestly have overlapping abilities. You update certain things for new sets. And so my list, I sort of cut down on mana production. I just sort of took that out of my top 10 because I figured, a lot of those effects are real repeatable, and I didn't want to have a ton of them in my list, so I cut down on those. And I really went for iconic cards that didn't just have a lot of pro play, although a lot of mine do have a lot of pro play, but I really wanted to focus on iconic in Magic. And actually, my number 10 has both. My number 10 dominated a format. It's banned in Legacy, it's banned in Modern, it was banned in Standard, and it was banned in the block format that it came out in. When the card came out, it was called the most broken card in the set. I think that Evan said that when he came back to Magic, he specifically recalled seeing this card and was like, what are you doing, Wizards of the Coast? So in June 2004, we had Darksteel released, and a little old card called Skull Clamp came out.
Yeah.
So Skull Clamp is my number 10. Skull Clamp is a 1 casting cost uncommon artifact originally from the Darksteel expansion. The equipped creature, it's a artifact equipment, one of the first equipment, and the equipped creature gets +1/-1. And when the equipped creature is put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards and had an equip cost for 1 measly mana. I mean, immediately did this card take over. It was so good in the artifact strategies. A lot of the small creatures, things like Arcbound Worker and Arcbound Stinger, were really popular in Affinity. Also, Elf Clamp or Elf Ball. The Elf Tooth and Nail decks were really popular using Skull Clamp. And beyond that, it could just be used as a value artifact in all sorts of strategies, like White Weenie and all sorts of things. Even to this day, it's an uber powerful card in the cube. At the regionals for standard that year, I remember that there wasn't really a deck that didn't use 4 skull clamps. Like, there just wasn't. Why would you? You had control decks that were running skull clamps. And so, all of the top 16, all the top 32s, there just were 4 skull clamps in the entire top 8. And so skull clamp, I think, fits all of those, checks off all the boxes. It was iconic. It was powerful. It was banned. And to this day, people still know the power of skull clamp.
If you look at no modern ban list events, skull clamp is everywhere. The people are going, oh, well, we can use Deathrite Shaman in modern, and we can use, Jason modern, and we can use Hypergenesis. Oh, no, girl. Everybody's running skull clamp. Affinity's running it. Delver's running it. Peasy's running it. That's what people play no modern ban list for, is the chance to play skull clamp. Yeah. I was a late convert to the Church of Skull Clamp. I did not discover its appeal until I started playing my Locust God deck, where I discovered the infinite combo of Ashnod's Altar, Skull Clamp, and Locust Gods. So if you're able to sacrifice a Locust, make some colorless to then equip it, to then draw 2 cards, which makes you some Locusts, and essentially you can draw your whole deck and make a bunch of Locusts. And so it's a great feeling, but I did not initially. I admit I was one of those people where I was like, I don't get it. Yeah. And because I wasn't there for
Evan got it.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, here's the thing. I mean, of all the things that Skull Clamp was, number one, it was a mistake. Because they changed something at the last minute. It was originally +1/+1, and they changed it to +1/-1, and for whatever reason,
try to weaken it. LOL.
Yeah, literally, just we'll make it worse. Lol. And that was ridiculous. Because again, the day this was previewed is the day that I came back to Magic. I was just like, "What's going on, Magic? I ain't seen Magic in a long time." Boop doop doop. What are you doing, people? I thought I was busted when you played Affinity back in the day. So, and here was another kind of sort of like really cute and adorable thing that I did. When I got back into Magic, I got a Magic Online account, and I was like, "Oh, cool! I can play Magic Online." And so one of the first things I did, I was like, "Hey, Skull Clamp's just uncommon. I'll get 4 Skull Clamp, and I'll play like a really cool Skull Clamp deck." Well, it was hated. And so if you ever tried to play Skull Clamp in the casual room, people would just quit on you. And it took me like 5 or 6 games of people quitting on me I realized that they hated me for the Skull Clamp thing. And then I was upset because I bought 4 Skull Clamp I really couldn't use. And there was sadness.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it's just it's so memorable. I mean, it was in From the Vault Exiled. It's been reprinted a bunch of times. People still to this day understand just how broken Skull Clamp is.
So, another card. So for my top 10, another card from Darksteel, in fact, because, Bearden did a lot of really crazy things.
With artifacts in particular.
And for my top 10, what I tried to focus on was either sort of their impact culturally, or they did something new and different, and they changed the way that Magic looked, or the way Magic felt, and the way that they just existed. So when you could do something during a phase that you weren't supposed to do something, like there's no ley lines on this set, in this list or whatever, but when you could do something you're not really supposed to, that to me is interesting and new and unique. And this card still sees play in the crazy combo decks because it helps them find what they need. Because during your mulliganing step, if you have serum powder, you get to mulligan basically for free.
Oh my god, how is this not on my list?
And serum powder is just this nutty, weird card that kind of came out of nowhere, and it says it's a 3 generic mana artifact. As a card, it's terrible. It's a 3 generic mana artifact. It's a rare from Darksteel that taps for 1 generic mana. Okay, whatever.
I have cast many a serum powder when things have gone bad. I'm not too proud to say that.
Wow, well, fair enough. Wow. It does function as a magic card. It is a weird mana rock. But anytime you could mulligan and it's in your hand, you may remove your hand from the game and then draw that many cards. You can do this in addition to taking mulligans. So you basically get a free mulligan. Yes, you're losing the rest of the cards in your hand, so if you were relying on something, you don't get that anymore. But oftentimes that doesn't matter. You're just looking for a better 7 than the 7 with the 1 in the serum powder was. And that to me, again, was just like a really weird, game-changing, what are you doing in your mulliganing step? This weird artifact thing. That to me was awesome.
Yeah. Obviously, it's a staple of the dredge decks. I've certainly powdered myself to oblivion before. I think the most I've ever powdered is 3 in a row at 7 apiece, where I'm essentially just playing a limited deck at that point.
Yep.
There's also an archetype in Modern. People have been playing Serum Powder Eldrazi. Which occasionally sees play in Modern, and yeah, card is fantastic. I can't believe I missed it. I'm so sorry. But yeah, Powder's great, especially if you are looking for that specific card. And yeah, we just haven't really seen anything like it before. Since, yeah.
A lot of the combo decks that have a lot of repeatable effects, things like Dredge, things like Modern Grishol brand, and also obviously that Eldrazi deck that you were just referencing, want access to Serum Powder. It doesn't fit in everything. Having access to a full 7 isn't that important for most traditional types of Magic cards, or most Magic decks, but certainly trying to get the perfect 7 or having access to one specific card like Bazaar of Baghdad is particularly important. Serum Powder is just super unique and super special, and it's another one of those cards that was reprinted in the iconic from the Vault series. So I think it was.
No, it was only an Iconic Masters.
It was Iconic Masters. Well, that's the iconic part.
Right, because that's what you think of. I guess I think of it as iconic now, don't I? All right, let's move on here to number 9. Aaron, what's your number 9?
I tried to not like this card. This card is an EDH staple, and I tend to play budget EDH. And so when I picked up this card, it was floating for around $10, which is a lot for me. And I happened to be I was playing my Locust God deck, and I was told that I needed some sort of effect to make my Locust bigger, because having a bunch of 1/1s is great, but having them be really big is even better. And I just, there's that little punk rocker in me that was like, I didn't want to be a sellout. I wanted to use something else, something different, change the game. And then after a couple of games with my Locust God deck, I was like, maybe I'll just try this card out. Maybe we'll just see if it lives up to the hype. And so I paid the $10.
Yeah.
And then I killed somebody with 100 damage, and I was like, this card is the truth. My number 9 is Coat of Arms.
Nice.
So Coat of Arms is 5 colorless. It says each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature on the battlefield that shares at least one creature type with it. For example, if 2 Goblin Warriors and a Goblin Shaman are on the battlefield, each gets +2/+2. And tribal effects are sometimes they benefit everybody, and sometimes they benefit just your creatures. And this is something that affects everybody on the board. So if you have a zombie and I have zombies, we benefit each other's zombies. And if we all are if Ruben's playing a fairy deck and I'm playing a zombie deck, his fairies are bigger and my zombies are bigger. And this card just changes the game. Being able to make 5 locusts, you're now looking at a bunch of 5/5s, a bunch of 4/4s, big locusts, and it really changes the game. And best $10 I ever spent was investing in Coat of Arms. But I tried so hard. I was like, I just don't want to. Everybody's using it. I want to be different. And now I'm like, I need it. I'm not leaving home without it.
They've printed this card 11 times, and it is still $7 a pop.
Yeah.
Like, that's as cheap as you're going to find it. And I mean, and even when it was back in Standard for a little while, with Magic 2010, like it did see some play. Like it is a very powerful effect. If you're able to get a bunch of tokens, play this thing and kill your opponent.
Particularly in the Elves decks, because the Elves want an overrun effect, and they can use their mana to play the Coat of Arms and then untap and attack later, and then you have a bunch of little tiny Rambos running around. Real popular in the Slivers archetypes, came in the premium deck series Slivers. I love that original Exodus pirate art. It just looks super awesome, and I love it. Coat of Arms is a casual kitchen table all-star that occasionally sees a little bit more play, but certainly a very iconic card for a lot of different reasons.
It's also one of those cards that you can go back and look at, like why did everybody hate 7th edition? Go look at Coat of Arms. Go look at what Coat of Arms used to be, and then go look at Coat of Arms 7th edition, and you're just like, oh my god, it's a nice example.
Wizards, what are you doing? Wizards, stop.
Wizards, please. Ruben, what's your number 9?
My number 9 is higher. It's my only higher on somebody else's list.
All right. Well, I got one of those coming up, but for my number 9, this was one of those cards. Now, as I recall, this was. I don't think it was a. It was a make. I don't think you made the card, but maybe it was. Because it's a card that, again, it does something different. It does something weird. After this card was printed, everything was, different. And now it's worth like $1 million. It's like a $60 artifact, because what it does is so good. What it does for free. And what it only does for 3 mana. So in 5th Dawn, Crucible of Worlds showed up.
Yep.
And
this was a community. This was the first community make the card, I think.
There you go. I could have sworn, that this was a the community came together and said, we want this weird effect. We want it for this much mana. Go on R&D, make it happen, and they made it happen. And Crucible of Worlds is a 3 generic mana rare artifact from 5th Dawn. You may play land cards from your graveyard as though they were in your hand. So this was an ability that was reprinted recently on a creature in Amonkhet, whose name I don't recall at this very second.
Ramunap Excavator.
Excavator. Pulled it up right here. And so that was a green and 2 generic mana. So that was still a 3 mana, Crucible quote-unquote effect. However, it was on a creature, and creatures die, and it died to Lightning Bolt, and blah, blah, blah. So, like, Crucible of Worlds, having been printed 4 times in paper, 5th Dawn, 10th, there was a Judge foil, and there was the Kaladesh Invention, still a $60 card. So this card is a very, very powerful card. It does just what you want, allows you to do repeatable, scary, and often really annoying effects, like strip mining over and over.
I have to ask, and I might have asked this before, but what exactly is it? Is it a petri dish? Is it an hourglass? I'm still not clear as to what the art is
it's
portraying.
It's an hourglass with the felled land,
on one side,
tilled land dropping down. If you're looking at it like this,
okay, because I've looked at it
dropping from here into the bottom to make new
bones. Okay, because I've always whenever I look at it, I always just spend a minute I tilt my head, I tilt the card, and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, it's a strange angle for sure.
Yeah,
but super iconic artwork as well, but very memorable. And you're right, it's an effect that had never been really printed before and led to a lot of really interesting decks that came out of it. Mm-hmm. There was obviously Wasteland's Best Friend and Strip Mine and those kind of effects, but also was important early on in the development of the blue-white extended Tron decks. Used Crucible of Worlds to get the Gifts Ungiven lock together with Mindslaver and Academy Ruins. And so there were a lot of different things that Crucible of Worlds helped enable.
Man, this card was super sweet from the moment it showed up. I'm still a little shocked at how high the price is, but that's what a Commander card will do for you. You only
Absolutely.
You only printed it 2 times, for real, and then 2 promos. So,
right.
All right, well, an amazing effect it is. That said, we're going to move on here to number 8. And I don't have one. My very only higher is this one. So, Ruben, what is your number 8?
My number 8 it does have Pro Tour success. It did win a Pro Tour, albeit 1 copy in the World Championships decks from 2003. But more importantly, it's one of the central pieces of Magic lore and story, and is a important facet of many different story arcs early-ish in Magic. It's the set symbol for the set Odyssey. It's just an extremely important card on many fronts. For me personally, I played a lot of a deck named after this card and another card that is named after this card. So I spent a lot of time casting Murari's Wake, and also casting Murari. So Murari is a 5 mana artifact, legendary artifact, originally a rare from Odyssey. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay 3 colorless. If you do copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. The Murari, as a card, I have fond memories of, because back in the day, this with Cunning Wish, the way that sideboard rules used to work was that you could copy Cunning wish for one wish that was in your sideboard, and then later you could complete that cycle because that wish that you first cast could target another one, so you could rebuy extra cards every turn. The rules don't work that way anymore, unfortunately, and so Murari's usability with the wishes isn't nearly as good, but that was basically how Daniel Zink ended up winning the World Championship, was with a Bant Murari's Wake deck that used to rebuy stuff like wing shards out of the sideboard and had lots of extra, utility things that he would Cunning Wish for. Murari is a central piece of a lot of Magic story. It was in the Cabal coffers. Karn was looking for it for quite some time. I think it ended up turning into Memnarch, if I'm not mistaken.
Karn reshaped the Murari as a sentient being, Memnarch. He named Memnarch the protector of Argentum, which is the plane that as Karn named it. However, he eventually renamed the plane Mirrodin. And also populating the hollow world with species from other planes.
And that Memnarch storyline is a lot. Like I got really curious and tried reading it one day, and just even like the Cliff's notes of it is like, what's going on here? Like,
yeah,
it's a little crazy.
It's one of the most powerful single items in the entire multiverse. I mean, sometimes, every once in a while, I'll see a Vorthos thread pop up of like, what's the most powerful spell that's ever been cast? Who's the most powerful person that's ever existed in the magic world? What's the most powerful single piece of technology? And the Murari always pops up. It was, world shaping and was massively potent, and was also a pretty darn good magic card.
Which is a nice sort of cherry on top of that one.
Yeah.
Aaron, what's your number 8?
So I've talked about things that I like, specifically in Commander and just in general. I appreciate randomness. I appreciate variance. I appreciate creatures growing to absurd heights. I also appreciate, some light graveyard shenanigans, and I also appreciate having an answer to things. I don't like being backed into a corner. I like knowing that if something comes up, I have an answer for it. And my number 8 is a very clean answer to a lot of things. And I have a new appreciation for this card since I started playing Shroom, EDH. There's a little card called Master Transmuter that essentially lets you loop cards, and you haven't lived until you've looped Spine of Ishsaw. My number 8 is Spine of Ishsaw. So Spine of Ishsaw is 7 colorless, which is a lot, but we'll get there. It's an artifact. When Spine of Ishsaw enters battlefield, destroy target permanent. Anti-permanent, lands, planeswalkers, whatever ails you, get rid of it. And then when Spine of Ishsaw is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return Spine of Ishsaw to its owner's hand. So it has this neat kind of Ichor Wellspring-ish effect where, like, if you happen to get rid of it, you're getting some value there. And just being able to loop it. I can't tell you how many times I've just bounced it back at Master Transmuter and just destroyed all your stuff. And it feels fantastic if you happen to be playing a Krark Clan Ironworks deck. There are many ways to sacrifice artifacts. You also get some value out of that too. And this is just a neat way to, if you're playing an artifact-centric deck, this is a neat way to get rid of whatever's troubling you. I'm curious, though. I wasn't around for this original set. Is Ishsaw, do we know what Ishsaw is?
Is the Vault of Whispers. It was the dwelling place of Geth on Mirrodin, as well as other Moriok and Necromancers. It is shaped as a cone-like mountain with a circular hole towards the middle and an opening at the top which spews necrogen mist. Geth controlled the Nim from here, though it was also a place of study of the dark arts and a lodge for Moriok artificers. Those who stayed here were known as disciples.
Okay, well, being able to tutor for
Disciples
artifacts
of the
is
Vault.
Nice. Yeah, the card is fantastic, and I just love being able to push it to its limit.
That's super cool. So this was in the, I guess, sort of around the range, the mountain range of the Vault of Whispers. That's super cool.
This was a little bit popular in the Mud decks in Legacy for a little bit, but yeah, super cool card, and very memorable, particularly from those from an artifact set.
Yeah. So let's move on here to number 7 now. Ruben and I, we share a choice.
We do.
And that's really cool because the way that this card works, and I'll let Ruben kind of sort of tell you what it does and whatnot, but the way that this card works is a very interesting kind of send up. It's almost a thank you letter in many ways, because when there was no magic, and and Richard Garfield was like, look, I've got these things that give us this power. What do you call that power? What are we supposed to call this stuff? What does this symbol mean? And the word mana came from a story that was written by Larry Niven. Yep. And if you turn his name backwards, you get Nevin's Disc, which is our number 7. Ruben, what does it do?
So Nevin's Disc is a 4-mana artifact originally from Alpha and been reprinted many, many, many times. Nevin's Disc enters the battlefield tapped and has the ability of pay a colorless and tap : destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Just a super iconic card, very unique, particularly in early Magic, being able to blow up particularly enchantments for colorless mana. This was very important for decks that were red and black or both, to be able to have a way to deal with powerful enchantments or remove your own necropotence from the board, for example. Destroying all artifacts and creatures, being able to clear out a board, have a wrath effect in decks that didn't always have access to that sort of effect. Had a little bit of a slow entry since it came into play tapped. tapped. The placement of that colon is super interesting too, as you are able to respond to your own activation of activate Nevin rolls disc colon, in response bounce it to my hand, or do something else weird with Nevin rolls disc, like violin a flicker wisp or something weird. It's just a super unique, super awesome card. Again, extremely iconic in From the Vault Relics, among other expansions that it's been reprinted in. The character of Nevin Roll, that was of course named after Larry Niven, controlled Urborg, and he used the disc when he was about to lose Urborg to Bogarden, I think, and he was like, well, if I can't have it, nobody can, disc, and blew up the world and sacrificed Urborg in the process. So the flavor is there, the old school clout is there. It's a powerful card that's seen lots of play over its history, particularly in early Pro Tours and Grand Prix. Just all around a home run, and definitely deserving of some recognition.
Well, and last little bit of trivia here, it's been printed as of this recording 18 times.
I love Disc. It really is. I've been talking about Commander a lot this episode. This is a card that I don't know any deck that really leaves home without Disc. Especially if you play black. I have a mono black deck that, I didn't have it in there. And the first thing people said to me is, how do you plan on dealing with enchantments? How do you plan on dealing with whatever? You need to have Disc in your deck. And so, I love this card. And I believe, I want to say just about all of my decks have it, just because it's so dang efficient. And
yeah, this was Black's way of getting rid of enchantments. They got rid of this card out of Standard because of that very fact. They're like, Black should not be able to deal with enchantments that easily, and so we got to go. And the Veneral's Disc was out as of 5th edition, and at that point has only showed up in Master sets and Commander sets. So, and From the Vault. That said, while we share a number 7, Aaron, obviously we don't. So what's your number 7?
I love wild ways to win games. You have Battle of Wits, you have, near-death experience. I think that's the card where, like, if you're down to one, or the one where you're at 1 life and you...
Right, have, like, one permanent and 1 card in hand or something like that.
So I love things like that. And I remember when I saw this card came out, it was actually a reprint from another set, and I'd never seen this card before. And I looked at this and said, no one's ever going to do this. Like, no one's going to be able to get this off. And this was right around the time that Ali Antrazi was really doing his thing. And we had Chromatic Lantern in Standard. And he was like, hold my beer. And this was a deck in Standard for a while. This was an actual viable way to kill somebody at Standard tournaments, which I'd never seen before. My number 7 is Door to Nothingness. So Door to Nothingness is 5 colorless. It comes into play tapped. And then if you have 2 white, 2 blue, 2 black, 2 red, 2 green, and you tap it, you sacrifice it, and target player loses the game. I had just come back to Standards. I didn't know who Ali was. I didn't know that there was this subsection of people that love sort of pushing the limit and doing crazy things. And so it was reprinted in Magic 2013. It originally came out in 5th Dawn. And I was just like, there's no way, you guys. Like, no way. And then people were running the Keystones, which were a thing from Return of Ravnica Black Chromatic Lantern. And people were dying in Standard tournaments to Door to Nothingness. And I think it's fantastic. I love the 2 versions of the art. You have the one from 5th Dawn where the person's literally being pulled into this vortex. And you see them just being ripped down there. And then you have the other one that is just essentially the swirling vortex kind of sucking up everything. And I love the flavor text, especially the first version. All memory of your existence will be wiped from reality. You will die and no one will mourn. Like, what?
Yeah, it's pretty hardcore Mimnarch going on there.
Yeah, and this card has seen some new life thanks to Ramos, Dragon Engine, which is one from the recent Commander set. It's inspiring like 5 color decks again. And God bless them. I think it's great.
And recently there was a online cube, I think it was a Legacy cube or something, where the mana was just like disgusting. You could get all the colors of mana really, really easily. And I killed people with Door to Nothingness. Like, legitimately in cube, just like, kill all your stuff. Okay, I got a bajillion mana, and you die. And that's just how it works. Because you have Murari's Wake Out, you get double mana, and hijinks ensue. But Door to Nothingness, interesting point is, if you have a Platinum Angel or a similar effect, and someone, casts Door to Nothingness on you, nothing happens. Yeah. Because you can't lose. And it says they lose the game, and you can't lose. So, I thought that was interesting. It literally just fizzles, which I thought was neat.
That's hilarious.
Cool. So let's move on here to number 6. Ruben, what is your number 6?
My number 6 is near and dear to my heart. In addition to being iconic and being super memorable and being reprinted a couple of times, it also goes in some mono red strategies, which is not super common all the time with artifacts. Most red cards are in mono red strategies. But this one, certainly the beginning of the Sly archetype and the early red decks. Folks like Dave Price and Alex Schwartzman were super big on qualifying with the Mog angle. They had like 20 goblins in their deck and super aggressive red creatures. And this was another way to finish off control players, in addition to being playable in any number of different types of decks, since it is colorless. It got a Magus named after it, of course. And it's also responsible for one of the best bluffs in the history of Magic, where I forget the name of the tournament, but there was a player who had this card in play, and the way that this card works is you have to name a card, and then you reveal a card at random from your hand and do something, and he named Boyle, and didn't have Boyle in his main deck or sideboard, but the blue player that he was playing against was so afraid of Boyle that he let every spell resolve for the rest of the game, and he bluffed it to get a huge advantage, and it worked. Which I just love that story, and it harkens back to the Wild West days of Magic when you could really, go after somebody with some mind tricks and stuff like that. Just one of the many things that Cursed Scroll is capable of. So Cursed Scroll is a 1 colorless mana artifact from Tempest. It's a rare. And it says, pay 3 colorless and tap, name a card. Target opponent chooses a card at random from your hand. If he or she chooses the named card, Cursed Scroll deals 2 damage to target creature or player. What that usually meant in the red decks was pay 3 colorless and tap. If you have 1 card in your hand, just deal 2 damage to your control opponent. The other thing that was important to remember about back in the day, especially during this Tempest format, was 4 mana and up creatures were really inefficient, and so nobody really played them. And Cursed Scroll was kind of like pay 3 mana, tap, destroy target creature, or deal 2 damage to your opponent. It was a really just excellent way to finish people off. I've killed more than one person by dealing 6 or more damage with Cursed Scroll as the game gets long. They can only counter so many effects. You would drop this on turn 1 and it would sit there until turn 4 or 5, and then you'd start scrolling them to death. The art is super iconic. It was brought back for Iconic Masters as a mythic because, come on, this thing is pretty difficult to deal with. Just one of my favorite cards of all time. I love me a Cursed Scroll.
It came back in Tempest Remastered.
Sorry, Tempest Remastered.
Right, which is an online set, but it did come back as a mythic because it is a really interesting and powerful card. Funnily enough, as I recall the R&D telling the story, they thought this was going to be like a fun game. You know what I mean? Like, guess the card and do the thing. They didn't realize, you just get to 1 card and just bolt, shock them forever. Yeah. Which is what it was quickly adopted to. And again, like 1 mana slipped right into the counter spells was just perfect for that. And it was super, super powerful. An amazing card, was super close to my list. I loved it. And not only did it give aggro sort of a new way of thinking about things, because you just gotta understand there was no real like super fast red deck back then. It just didn't exist. And this made it exist. This thing made it exist, absolutely. There's also one of my favorite all-time misprints, and goes really well in folks who have the card as printed cubes. Folks like Anthony Avatolo, who have the Japanese Cursed Scroll that costs less to activate. It only costs 2 to activate with the Japanese Cursed Scroll. I wish this card saw more play. It feels like it's still pretty powerful. You go get it with your Trinket Mage, you go find it with your Tezzeret or whatever, but I guess it's been usurped by other more powerful things these days. But it just seems like Cursed Scroll could still see play, and I wish it did, but it'll live on in my memory for certain. Cursed Scroll is terrific, but we're going to move on here to Erin's number 6.
My number 6 is a card that I'm surprised took as long to make as it did. It's a hate card. It's an answer to a certain kind of effect that I can recall seeing as far back as I've been playing. And you would think that there would have been an answer to this sort of thing sooner, but there just wasn't. Card came out in New Phyrexia and immediately saw play. Was a great answer specifically to the Splinter Twin decks that plagued Modern for the longest time. And just it's one of those cards that just continues to have viability as more creatures come out and more effects see play. My number 6 is Torprob. So Torprob is 2 colorless. It's an artifact, and it says creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. This is something we tend to see a lot of. We've certainly seen that with the siege rhinos. We've seen that with I can think of every standard just having this is something I imagine being kind of an evergreen card that there are always going to be creatures that come into play and do something you don't want them to do, and this is a really great way to shut them off. And I'm really surprised that it took until New Phyrexia to really have an answer for this kind of thing. And if there have been prior ones, feel free to correct me, but this card was a huge sigh of relief, and I love this. It sees play in just about every format. As always, there are creatures that do this, and it's just a low cost, powerful effect. And the flavor text is nifty too, of Tezzeret saying, Phyrexia is dangerous, but I have to admire some of its innovations. And the art is beautiful. I'm still not quite sure what's going on there. There's a lot in the art. It's a great card. It's a very clean, efficient answer to a very specific problem.
Yeah, that's this card in particular. First of all, it was printed in 2011, and again, you hadn't seen this effect ever. But
you would think, yeah.
Yeah, but it didn't show up again until Magic 2015 and Commander 2016 from Hushwing Griff.
Yeah.
And later in Ixalan, just printed, was Tukatli Honor Guard, which is also
kind of the
2 mana. So
kind of taking the same course as we talked about Crucible of Worlds. They haven't really given us that card again, but they've added it to a stick or added it to a body and said, here you go, here's that effect, which I think is cool.
Right.
Kind of crazy that they haven't reprinted this card. It was super popular at the time. Obviously, they were kind of lucky that it came out in New Phyrexia, and they printed it along with the Exarchs without realizing that they printed Deceiver Exarch and Splinter Twin in Standard, so they had a built-in answer.
Yeah.
Torprob seen a ton of play as answers to Titans, as answers to infinite 1/4s, as answers to everything in between. Very, very potent sideboard card, the definition of like the hard answer artifact.
So speaking of, not necessarily hard answer artifact, some a very powerful artifact for just 2 mana. We got to bring it back all the way to Alpha, because sometimes cards are so good. We got to explain continuous artifacts, y'all.
Oh, bother.
There was poly artifacts you could use once a turn, and there were continuous artifacts that you could use as long as they were untapped. If they were tapped, they shut off. They didn't. Nothing happens anymore.
I remember that.
And that was a thing because rules were weird, and what that made sense at the time. So, and later, as time wore on, they didn't want to change how this card worked because of that. And as sort of wording changed, they kept going on, and then they kind of forgot about it and said, you know what, don't worry about that crap. And then they came back and they said, you know what, it's kind of part of the card. So when you're dealing with a Winter Orb, it's a 2 generic mana artifact. It's rare. Most recently printed in Eternal Masters. And it says these days, as long as it's untapped, players can't untap more than 1 land during their untap steps. So it was really cool back in the day to use Icy Manipulator, which was also an alpha card, to tap Winter Orb. And on your untap step, you get to untap everything, and now it's untapped, and your opponent gets diddly. And that's where I played my Time Elementals, and I played my Stasises, and I played my Sarah Angels, who had Vigilance, and that was really important back in the day. And I would kill people with this card. And this is a card that is like such incredible hate. This card is so miserable. There is a misery level to all cards. This one is like, it's from 0 to Winter Orb, because your opponent will just get strangled trying to do anything. And if they do something and you bounce it, if they do something you counter it, if they do something you're tapping their land somehow. This card is relentless, and this card is very powerful, and there's a reason you're only going to see it in Eternal Masters and Masters type sets, because 5th edition was the last time they were okay with this in Standard, and it wasn't okay.
It wasn't okay. Yeah, this card is extremely potent to this day in the cube. People have toyed with it in Legacy, actually, a little bit, mostly in like Delver strategies, decks that don't require a lot of mana to function and have wastelands and things like Daze and stuff like that. To be able to deal with the larger threats, by which I mean 3 cast and cost creatures.
Legacy, am I right?
The old, exactly. The old classic is the Undiscovered Paradise combo, where you return your Undiscovered Paradise to your hand and get extra mana every turn. And folks would play that with Horn of Greed and things like that back in the day. That was the standard go-to with Winter Orb. Also really popular in sort of aggressive strategies, where once you've got all your creatures, like you go 1-drop and Winter Orb, or 1-drop, 2-drop, and then another 1-drop Winter Orb and shut down your opponent if they have plans of Wrath of Godding or doing anything relatively expensive at any point in their lives. Winter Orb was able to shut that down. Also quite good with elves, obviously, as the elves are able to untap, but not the Winter Orb. Probably the best translation of any card ever is the German Winter Orb, aka Frostbringer. That's a pretty badass translation. I'm a big fan of a Frostbringer. I also like Worm Spiral Machine for Worm Coil Engine into the German, but nice. Every once in a while there's some real nice German translations, and that's one of them.
That's fantastic. So we're going to move on here to number 5. Aaron, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is a card I've talked about frequently on this show. It was actually our preview card for Rivals of Ixalan. I remember when we previewed it, getting a lot of condolence messages of "I'm so sorry, this card was a troll." What people didn't understand is I was actually really looking forward to testing this card and seeing what it could do. And I can confidently say that the card has revolutionized. Revolutionize. There you go. You got words mean things. Revolutionize the way that we play Modern or Legacy Dredge. I'm going to SCG Worcester this weekend, and I ain't leaving without 3 of these babies in my sideboard. My number 5 is Silent Gravestone. Nice. So Silent Gravestone is one color. It's that good, y'all. It is that good, I'm telling you. So it's 1 colorless. Cards in graveyards can't be the targets of spells or abilities. This is a ground seal type effect. Or you can pay 4 colorless and tap it to exile Silent Gravestone, and all cards from all graveyards draw a card. So the reason why this card is so powerful is similar to the reason Hollow One became powerful in Vintage, is that the graveyard hate that people were playing didn't necessarily only function one way. Like, it wasn't really dealing with your graveyard. Your graveyard was still very much a resource. So you could delve, you could cast Gourmet Anglers and Hooting Mandrills and things of that nature. Everybody was running Grafdigger's Cage and Containment Priest. And so the best way to get around that is to then tailor your response to the hate people are playing. If all the hate goes one way, you want to be doing the exact opposite. And right now, Legacy is dominated by cards like Surgical Extraction and Deathrite Shaman, which target your graveyard. No one's running Rest in Peace anymore, thanks to Reanimator. No one's really running Leylines anymore. And so being able to slam this on turn 1 and being like... or even just playing the long game. You know, you'll start out with a Faithless Looting, and if they let you have it, cool. If they don't, fine. We'll do this on turn 2 and go in the long game. And I can say in testing, this card is delivered against the decks you wanted, and it's great. And I've been screenshotting just the sad defeats of Deathrite players who moldify for a Deathrite, and then it's just completely obsolete. And the card is the truth, and I'm just so glad it exists.
That's amazing. Because Deathrite Shaman literally is a 1-mana 1/2 at that point. Yeah. You got a sweet
off
squire.
Reanimator decks. They have to have Exhume. Animate Dead won't work. Reanimate won't work. And that's another deck that you just... and you just watch them dig. And it's like, you got Exhume? Because if you don't, and if you got Exhume, I got a Grave Troll with your name on it. Yeah, so let's do this.
I can't hear you. My gravestone's so silent. I'm sorry, what?
But it's just a card that, like I said, a lot of people went into it thinking it was going to be the bane of graveyard decks. And in reality, it was great.
Nice. That's what you were looking for.
It's exactly what you wanted, is grave hate for other people, but not for you.
Yeah.
It was a one-sided, it was your rest in peace that you could finally embrace.
That's awesome. Yeah. Ruben, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is an artifact from perhaps the most iconic artifact deck of all time, Affinity. And it's one of the reasons why the deck was so potent. You wanted to build up a critical mass of artifacts for a couple reasons. Partially because you could, originally when Affinity was a big deck, you could sacrifice all your artifacts to drain someone out with Disciple of the Vault or make a very big Arcbound Ravager. But more often than not, what you would do actually was just make a big old cranial plating. So cranial plating was... Yeah, it's that time, kids. Cranial Plating is a 2 casting cost artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control. It equips for a colorless, but also has an activated ability of black attach Cranial Plating to target creature you control. This card, of course, is famous for having won the 2004 Pro Tour, the #Ham Sandwich Pro Tour, for those of you who are fans of old commentary, as won by Pierre Canali over Shuhei in the finals. Had 3 copies of Cranial Plating in that deck, and to this day sees play in Modern Affinity, has won numerous Grand Prix, made the top 8s of numerous tournaments, and is being equipped to Ornithopters and Memnites and Frogmites and somber hover guards and what have you from artifact creatures from past, from present, and on into the future. I think it's my only common that I have on the list, and well deserving, as it was kind of the one-shot robot before Blightsteel Colossus came along, and to this day is just the biggest piece of final, killing somebody outright with an artifact deck.
Let's go ahead and put yourself back in the world of 2004.
Yeah.
So you're playing Magic, and Skull Clamp happens, right? And you're living that best life in the middle of Affinity Hell.
Yeah.
And Wizards is like, we got this new set, guys. You're going to love it. And then they're like, radio played it. And like, tables were being flipped. Like,
right, because Skull Clamp came out in Darksteel.
Oh my God.
So when Fifth Dawn comes out and you're like, give us something. And they're like, how about more artifact equipments for your artifact deck? And they were like, not ideal. Yeah, it was a problem. Affinity took over in a way that that very few decks in Standard ever have.
Right, like that's when you entered like the most crazy level of brokenness. And again, I was just, Wizards was like, hey guys, we have a lot of fun. They're great, played great. Like, no, you've done horrible things. It's just, man, it's you're not even like shooting people in the head. You just set the whole place on fire. You're just like, let everybody's gone. I don't care. Do what I want. Whew. All right. So for my number 5 was much like Torprob, which was one of those where it's like, man, how long did it take for we finally got this card, for we finally got this effect? Because, and it ended up being one of the chase rares of the set because the set was incredibly bad. But, which is unfortunate. But, I've opened entire boxes of this set hoping to just get one of these just because the set was really bad.
Yeah.
But the effect was amazing. And it was one of those things, it was one of the first times where Wizard was like, you know what, we're going to give you a universal, cheap, easy to understand and use answer to no matter what the card is. Pithy Needle can stop it. Pithy Needle says no. Pithy Needle can shut down anything you want for 1 measly mana. It was in Savers of Kamigawa. Savers was crap. Savers was Kataki, Pithy Needle, and cards that were terrible. Like, it's shocking how bad that set was. And, as I attended the Savers of Kamigawa pre-release, and as my friend won a box and we opened it on the way home, he opened the entire box. He got 1 Pithy Needle. We all gave it the high five. The other cards, I don't know. He threw them out and did something weird with them because they're all like 37 mana legends that no one gives a crap about. Right. But Pithy Needle was the winner. And Pithy Needle was a card that lived in sideboards and has lived in sideboards for a very long time. Well, whenever they give it to us, because it showed up in Saviors, then 10th, then Magic 2010, and then not again until Return to Ravnica, in which it showed up, and you're like, all right, thanks. Yeah. We appreciate that, I think.
We like it. I mean, this is a thing we like, but why don't we always have it?
Right.
Yeah. Well, then they went ahead and added and then they went ahead and made it better with Sorcerer's Spyglass, where you can look at their hand first, and that way you never miss, and it's like, damn it. Right.
The old blind Pithing Needle on turn 1, hoping you get it right. That problem mitigated by the Spyglass. Pithing Needle is amazing. Pithing Needle, however it's pronounced.
It's one of those.
Just a spectacularly good card. Obviously, a premier Trinket Mage target. Sees play in all manner of formats to this day. Awesome choice.
All right, we'll move on here to number 4. Aaron, what's your number 4?
January 19th, 2015 was a great day. It was the day that the DCI unbanned my beloved prince, Golgari Gravetroll, only to reban him a year later. I see you. I have not forgotten, and I'm a toilet paper your house, Wizards. I see you. But something else happened on that day. They banned this card for just being too powerful. And I had a feeling this ban was coming. Like, sometimes you see powerful strategies, and they're feeling themselves a little too much, where it's like, all right, girl, you're doing a lot right now. And you're doing a lot because you know you can get away with it. I've been seeing that with Oath of Druids decks for a while in Vintage. They're playing whatever creatures they want to. They're running Carnage Tyrants. They're running Nezahals. They can run whatever they want because they can. And that's a sign of a card being too powerful for its own good. And I knew that this card was on its way out when people were pairing it with Obsidian Ghost Console. You're going too far. You got to go. My number 4 is Birthing Pod. So for those playing along at home, Birthing Pod is a 3 and a Phyrexian mana artifact, or it can be a green mana or 2 life. From New Phyrexia, it costs 4 total converted mana cost. You can pay 1 and a Phyrexian mana and tap it. You sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost, and put that card onto the battlefield. Great for your Torpor Orbs, friends. And then shuffle your library, activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. And so the way that this deck worked is you built your deck very carefully to have a certain number of converted mana cost creatures, and then you would chain them. So you start off with something silly like a dork, and then you would pot it, and then bring in something else. Then you would go up the ladder, and every one of these creatures has value. So every time they enter the battlefield, whether it be a borderline ranger, whether it be a hunt master of the fells, you're getting some kind of effect. And it creates this toolbox kind of situation where whatever you need, you can go get. And after a while, Birthing Pod deck started to become very dominant, and it just became powerful with every set. You know, every time new creatures came out, this card would be revisited, and you would start to see, eventually there was the Archangel of Thune thing, where you could assemble this infinite combo of life gain. But like I said, after a while, they were getting a little too crazy. They're potting for Siege Rhinos, they're potting for Obsidots, and it's like, all right, you're doing a lot right now. And there are still, I've seen people try it in Legacy. There's Legacy Pod, but this card is busted. And I don't know. I know people that are still mourning the loss of Birthing Pod, just to show you how beloved this card was. But the art is beautiful and very creepy. But yeah, Birthing Pod has to be up there.
This was my number 8. And because Birthing Pod is incredibly unique. Phyrexian mana is broken. I don't know if we've fully learned
We've established that.
It is broken. Anytime your resource can be bypassed in some way with like delving or like paying life, you're probably going to break something, and they broke it. So a turn 1 mana elf got this out on turn 2 and started going up the chain. Kitchen Finks with this just gets the Kitchen Finks back, so you can go get
gains the life back.
And gains the life you just paid, which is cool because then you can just use it again to get another 4-drop, which is amazing. So Birthing Pod was a card that didn't necessarily start insta-broken and didn't get a whole lot of attention, but it's also one of those cards that as Magic just continues its trudge along Magic's history, it just gets better. It just gets better and better and better and better. And it's one thing like Splinter Twin, I don't like this interaction. I don't like how it works with certain creatures. No. Birthing Pod is just like, you should just play the best thing that they're printing these days and just slide it into whatever number it certainly happens to be, and then you can break it because that card is busted.
Yeah, standard Birthing Pod was a ton of fun. You went up to Titans and then sometimes up to Elish Norn, depending on your meta game at the time. You had access to all the Exarchs. You had Brutalizer Exarch for the Mirror, for example, in addition to Deceiver Exarch, untapping your Birthing Pod and going further up the chain. There were lots of sweet things that you could do with Birthing Pod, banned in Modern because of how powerful it is. It breaks a ton of the rules. It breaks the mana rule. You can tutor with it. It cheats on mana. It's just a broken card, and will live in infamy as probably a bit of a design mistake, but people love them a Birthing Pod.
It's a cool card. It's just what it does is too good.
Absolutely.
For what you're paying.
It also led to the most anachronistic, popular competitive deck I think I've ever seen, which had Birthing Pod, a Phyrexian piece of technology, getting Melira Sylvok Outcast, the last non-Phyrexian converted human on the entire plane, and those two fighting together in Magic, which didn't. That's like the Harlem Globetrotters and Scooby-Doo. It didn't hang together for me. So.
All right. So what's your number 4, Ruben?
My number 4, again, I'm going back to the iconic well. This might be, it's hard to say. It's not one of the top maybe 3 most iconic artifacts of all time. I think people know when you say this what it means. It led to terminology. It's been around since the very beginning. It's originally from Alpha. It's been reprinted a bunch of times. People know what Icy Manipulator does. People just know what it is. Intrinsically, when you icy something or something's an icy effect, you know what that means. It's a 4-mana artifact originally from Alpha. It's been an uncommon the whole time, and it has the effect of pay a colorless and tap : tap target artifact, creature, or land. It was also a Pro Tour winning card in the very first Pro Tour deck. There were 2 copies of Icy Manipulator in Michael Lecanto's Championship 1996 deck, which was that classic blue-white control mix-up. It's been around forever. It's a favorite. It's an artifact that is constantly seeing play. I mean, I remember when it was in the red-green snow decks at the end of like Time Spiral, Cold Snap, Lorwyn Standard, and people were using it as like a mirror breaker to be able to tap down opposing Cloud Threshers and dragons and stuff because you had lots of extra mana laying around. It was just such a popular card, such a good card, and it was kind of perfectly costed too. It inspired Ring of Gix, it inspired Trap Snare, and all sorts of other tapping artifacts, but nothing will ever really replace Icy Manipulator.
Man, that Bone Crank art from Ice Age.
The Ice Age Bone Crank art is nice.
First of all, I thought that card was rare back in the day, and back in the day there were no silver and gold symbols to tell you. You were just like, is this card rare? Maybe. I don't
good
see
enough to be rare.
It was super sweet. To this, like when I put it on my list as like possibles for my top 10, first of all, props for it being as high as it is. Second of all, like I said, Icy Manipulator parentheses Bone Crank art because that's the one. Because when I first got into Magic, it was during Ice Age, and I mean this thing was just enthralling. It was like nothing looks or feels or does what this does and looks as cool as it does while it's doing it.
Yeah,
Icy
absolutely.
is terrific. So we're going to move on here to my number 4. And my number 4 is another one of those fun broken things. I tried not to put too much brokenness in, but brokenness just happens to happen. My next few picks are a little more interesting, I think. But this one is busted. And as, again, another mistake. And is one of those things that if they just hadn't made it do what they had it do, and they couldn't make it work to start with, maybe you shouldn't just push things right out the door when you think that, well, we'll take an ability that's weird and we'll replace it with something that's not weird that ends up being the best thing ever.
Right.
So I was at the Betrayers of Kamigawa pre-release.
Oh, here we go.
As you do. And
see, I want everyone to know I purposefully left this card off my list because I knew that Evan was going to go off.
I left it off my list because I
off.
hate it. It's not a favorite of mine.
Oh, it's a favorite. It's one of those cards that, like, you just start, you started hearing whispers. Like, I legitimately heard people going, like, you see what's on table 1, man?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy, weird. It's weird as new equipment, man. It's crazy. It's just, like, took over the game all by itself, blah, blah. And, like, there was, like, this kind of wall of Magic players around the top tables because it was one side had a Numazawa's Jet, and the other side had Numazawa's Jet, and it was who could stick a creature to stick it on, because then that person would just run away with the game. Umazawa's Jite, which I think is the right way, Jite, whatever.
Jite, yeah.
Jite is broken. It's not a fair Magic card. It is a 2 generic mana for a rare legendary artifact equipment from Betrayers of Kamigawa. And whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage, you put 2 charge counters on it.
Why?
I wonder what they do. Let's find out what they do.
2 is a lot.
2 is a lot. Remove a charge counter from Umazawa's Jite, choose one. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn, or target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or you gain 2 life. Now see, that middle ability there, the -1/-1, that used to be add 2 generic mana to your mana pool. There's a problem with that, because mana abilities can't be countered. Which means if that was one of your options, none of the options could be countered. None of the options could be stopped. So they said,
late in development.
They're like, we'll just make it do -1/-1. That won't break anything. Oh my God, it broke everything.
To me, what makes this card so stupid, it wouldn't be, in my opinion, it wouldn't be so bad if it was dealt damage to a player, but any combat damage, if you chump block, if you don't block, it's happening. And what's worse is if you...
blank effect, yeah.
What's worse is if you kill the creature, the JIT still gets the counters, and it doesn't need to be on a creature to remove the counters. Like, I've killed the thing and been like, whoo! We're out of the clear, fam. And then you're like, there's still a JIT on the battlefield with 2 counters. I can just boop, boop, and it's like, why?
Yeah, it does everything all the time. It has all the wrong words, and the way it works for first strikers was like Paladin Onvec was insane with this card. I mean, you'd put, you resolve first strike damage and then pump your dude for as high as it needs to be so it doesn't die or whatever, or you just gain life, and that's the way you win the game, is that you're able to keep parity because they can't deal enough damage to you to get through it. Like Jite is in a class unto itself. It is the Jace the Mind Sculptor of equipment, and it will never be beaten because they will never make anything that broken again. I'm positive.
Absolutely.
All right, move on here to number 3, and I want to discuss my number 3 real fast because this is one of those that it's not just Jite. It's not just like, oh, it's raw power level, it's the greatest thing ever. This isn't necessarily the greatest power level, okay? But what it did was so unique and so game-changing. This was another one of those like, oh, Magic cards can do what moment? Because you'd never seen anything like it. And this was another one of those cool things where like Barrow usually breaks things. He doesn't mean to break things, but he breaks things. And, you know, and this one isn't broken, but it is so cool and fun because he had the idea of what if you could just like, what if you could be the other player? What if you could take control of the other player? What if you had his card named Mindslaver and you made them a slave to your mind? In Mirrodin, and later reprinted in Scars of Mirrodin, Mindslaver is amazing. It is a 6 generic mana for a rare legendary artifact. 4 generic mana, tap, and sacrifice it, you control target player's next turn. That means you see all cards that player could see and make all decisions for the player. He or she doesn't lose life because of mana burn, because this was Mirrodin and that was a thing. So there were a few silly questions. The first one being like, can I just concede as my opponent? That's not how that works. Right. And back in the day, it was, I'll get to mana burn them for their lands. Like, mana burn was silly, and I'm glad it's gone. Yeah. So when you get to Scars of Mirrodin, it's a bit cleaner. And you don't have to say a silly line like mana bird stuff. But it is just an iconic card in Magic. Changed the game. No one ever seen anything like it. It's an incredibly unique effect. When you say, I'm going to Mindslaver you, you know what that means. And if you don't know what that means, you should play Emrakul in the Promised End, because that card's dumb and no one likes it.
Outrage. Oh my god.
Yeah, you want to feel helpless? Have someone take your turn for you. That's helpless right there. It was also one of those cards that freaked Magic Online programmers out, because like, how in the world are we supposed to let you be your opponent for a turn?
The story I remember of that is that they came to the designers of the card came to Magic Online like way earlier than you normally do, like 3 months early, for like, hey guys, by the way, this card's coming, please figure out how to code this. And then Magic Online was just like, up yours, guys, for this, because it took them forever to code that effect into Magic Online, which was hilarious.
Yeah, and now it's a card, and it's changed Magic, and I love it, and nothing will be as cool, in my opinion, as game changes Mindslaver in terms of artifacts. It was just nuts. It was just weird. What am I supposed to take your turn? That's ridiculous. Ruben, what's your number 3?
So Magic has a lot of colloquialisms, a lot of terms that spring up. You know, we have our own language. In Magic, the word chump means something different. The word gas means something different. The word burn, pants, cantrip, goldfish. I mean, we have our own mise from back in the day. We have our own things. Every once in a while, though, a card will lead to its own type of terminology. Bear, for example, for a grizzly bear, refers to a 2/2 for 2. Deed, for pernicious deed. You know what that means. An edict effect refers to diabolic edict. There's a ton of them out there, but perhaps none is more ubiquitous these days than the term mill, which refers to removing cards from the top of your opponent's library and putting them into your opponent's graveyard, named after the eponymous Millstone. So Millstone, originally from Revised, ladies and gentlemen, was originally a rare, now an uncommon in its most recent printings. It's a 2 casting cost artifact that says pay 2 mana and tap. Target player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard.
So I'll stop you right there, buddy. This card is from Antiquities.
Ooh. Is it?
And it was a mono artifact.
Wow.
Yeah. Remember we talked about earlier about the poly and the mono and the thing?
And Antiquities had weird rarity shifting. So this was like a uncommon -2, which was equivalent to a rare. So yeah, I mean, it's they had a bunch of weird stuff going on in Antiquities, but it's been reprinted a couple times, and most recently in Magic 2014. Was obviously won the first Pro Tour. Again, this was the win condition in that Michael Locanto blue-white control deck, and led to the term milling your opponent. You don't say you sanity grind your opponent. You don't say you tome scour your opponent. I'm milling you for 7. I'm milling you for 3. Activate my Nephalia Drown Yard. Mill you for 3. That is where this term comes from, and it's so entrenched into our brains as Magic players that it's tough to forget. It's tough to remember that Millstone. That's where it came from originally.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, it's been outclassed like a million different ways.
Of course.
People can't go spec on it. It's not on the reserve list. It's been reprinted literally like a million times. But the last printing in Magic 2014 had some of the most incredible artwork. Absolutely amazing. This stone it's going around the head.
It's slowly grinding the head down, and it's really flavorful. I love that art.
Yang Hao Han did an amazing job, and that's one of my favorite pieces of art, just period. It just sucks that for 4 mana, you put 2 cards in the graveyard. Like, that's just not really the rate these days. It's worth it.
They can't all be the best card ever, but it was the win condition of the first Pro Tour deck. And so from then on, I'm a big grindstone fan, which is
I try not to think about that.
That's like my aesthetic. That's like my thing. So artifacts that do this have the stone in the name. There's also whetstone. There's a couple others. Right. And, of course, people are playing mill to this day in Modern and in Draft. And people play Hedron crabs and archive traps and all that sort of stuff. And they mill you. And that's what they do.
That's right.
This is a card that made me feel like a grizzled veteran. So the girl who got me into the game, Samantha, we still play Magic. And I remember we went to one of the core set pre-releases together. We've been playing since Ice Age. And I remember we were there and we were playing, and there were some kids that were like opening their packs, and they're like, "Oh man, all I got was this crappy mill." So we were like, "Listen, you little buggers." We were like, that card was everything at one point. Kids these days just don't appreciate what they have. And I remember we were just sitting in the corner like little bastards.
It did get downshifted to an uncommon in Magic 2014. I would love to see this shifted to a common, because I think Pauper could be interesting with this card.
Yes.
Because again, it's not that, it's just like, Grandpa Magic, what did you have to win with back in the day? Like, we had the stone, you see, and we just ground it in your head until you died.
Yeah.
That's what happens. Erin, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is a card that wasn't even printed in a set. There is a very small collection of cards that was not printed through traditional means. If you wanted this card, you had to mail in a form, and then you got the card when you purchased a book. And it's possible that people bought the book for more than just this card, but this was very much worth the price. Right. And this card does what you want it to do. It helps you ramp. It has a very, very low drawback. It is a staple of Vintage, where I believe it is restricted. But the card is fantastic, and the only thing better than playing on this card is watching someone die to this card. Mm-hmm. My number 3 is Mana Crypt. So Mana Crypt is a 0 converted mana cost. At the beginning of your upkeep, flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Mana Crypt deals 3 damage to you. And if you tap it, you just get 2 colorless, which is fantastic. And so most of the time, you don't necessarily care about the drawback, because you will have enough mana to do what you want to do and hopefully close out the game before then. But I can't tell you how many times I've won games I had no business winning. Just last week, in fact, I was playing against Vintage Shops, and I was dead. I was dead. I was like, oh no, like I passed the turn and they're at 3, and all of a sudden you see that so-and-so loses the coin flip, and it's like, yes! Yeah. And it just feels fantastic. And so not only is the card good for what you're trying to do, but sometimes with a little bit of luck in a coin flip, it can turn games around.
Yep. I have learned not to play this card, and I have always made it my mission, when anyone else plays it against me, I will live long enough to see that thing kill you. Yeah. I just want you to know, I will be here until you die from it. A healthy non-zero amount of people I've seen die to this card against me. I'm like, all right, new game plan, that kills you. I'm going to get you down, and you're going to die.
And it's been reprinted more on Magic Online. It was in Vintage Masters, it was in Eternal Masters, Masters Edition 2, and then it was recently a Kaladesh Invention. Right. But yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that it didn't come out through traditional means, and that's very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those cards don't live up to the hype. The Nalathonglongli Dragon, I briefly thought about putting in the overrated section, because that was the first one that came along, and people were like, oh no, the only way to get it is at this comic book convention in Georgia. I hope it's not good. And luckily it wasn't good. But Arena, I think, was the first time the only time that you could get Arena, the original printing of, until it was time shifted. Yeah. But yeah, obviously Mana Crypt is the winner for all the book promos.
Yeah, I mean it's a $100 plus card. I mean, Eternal Masters you can get it for about $90. Like that's a very expensive card, and I will make you die to it. I will live long enough.
It's a dangerous card, man. They can't
great.
print the card to have you take 1.5 damage a turn, so they had to print it this way. So it's like the only card that sees competitive play where you flip a coin. But yeah, it does lead to some exciting moments. And it's also an uber powerful card.
Yes. I mean, the power is there, and it is a very scary card, and I'll kill you with it. Yep. All right, so moving on to number 2 here. And this is also a card that makes mana. I didn't really necessarily have those constraints on myself. Again, this to me, we're reaching iconic status. We're reaching culturally definable. We're reaching something that has ubiquity across formats, across, not necessarily lore, but like, sort of the lore of the culture of like, oh, there's this thing and everybody knows about it and everybody understands how powerful it is. And honestly, Wizards gives it away a lot. Wizards has printed this card. Let's see, we're up to 12, 16, 21 times. They have, not only has it been printed 21 times, it is still worth almost $3.
Yeah.
Because no matter how hard you try, you'll never find a better cube card. You'll never find a better commander card. They put it in every single commander deck. It's Sol Ring.
Yep.
Sol Ring is an incredible, amazing card. It's hard to overstate how powerful this makes. All it does is a 1 generic mana for a uncommon artifact that taps to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. That's what it does. And not just like, generic mana, colorless mana. The wingdings themselves is what it's making. And again, they have included it in everything. It's been in all the commander decks. It's in the commander anthology. It was a Kaladesh invention, and it's now $200 as a Kaladesh invention.
Jesus.
Right.
Because you want to pimp it out because Sol Ring goes in everything. Like, it is just like the de facto, like, your commander deck really is kind of 98 cards. It's commander, Sol Ring, and cards that aren't those 2 things. Because this thing is insane, and you always love it, and it's always good.
Very polarizing card. There is always talk about banning it in Commander. Usually the person who has it on turn 1 is the one you go after because they're going to be a little bit ahead of you. And this was a card that when I first started playing Commander, I only had 1 copy of, and I would just sort of shuffle it in between my 2 or 3 decks. And I was like, I'm not going to need 3. It's fine. And then eventually I had that come to Jesus moment where it's like, just buy 6. Like, just, don't even bother. Again, kind of like the coat of arms thing. It was me going, I'm just going to try it. We're just going to give it a little taste. And then by the time I was like, just don't leave home without it, like, ever.
I had 1 Sol Ring that I had altered by an altarist. It was like my good suit, you know what I mean? Like, it's what you put on when you want to impress the folks. And so I would switch it between my EDH decks, and so that's what I ended up doing with that one. Sol Ring, just way too good. Definitely should not be legal in Commander. And you only ever need 1, so it's not surprising that the Kaladesh Invention is super expensive, because if you want 1 of a Kaladesh Invention, just like a Mana Crypt or another card that's banned or specifically restricted in either Vintage or sees a lot of play in Elder Dragon Highlander or other singleton formats. And Sol Ring is just the best thing that you can be doing on turn 1. It jumps you to 4 mana with no drawback, like Mana Crypt. It just puts you so far ahead, so far out of range. It is absurd.
I believe, if I'm looking at this correctly, they actually did not include Sol Ring in Commander 2012.
Wow.
I see 2011, I see 2013, but I don't see the rest of them. So I'll double check that while we're going through others. But
to be fair, they also put it in every single one of those decks. So it's been printed individually even more. Because they came in each of the different decks. So even though they'll all have the same set symbol, some of the, a fourth of them came out of the 1 deck and a fourth of them came out of the Ninja deck and whatever. So it's been printed, even though 21 is a lot, it's actually been in more products than that incognito.
It's a lot, but it was not in 2012 as it turns out, but then it was quickly back. So spoiler alert, they're never going to ban this card because they put it in every commander deck they ever made.
Yeah, they really should, but they won't.
They're all in on that one. Ruben, what's your number 2?
My number 2 checks all the boxes. I can say 1 word and it tells you exactly what I'm doing as a Magic player. It won a Pro Tour. It dominated multiple different types of formats over multiple different eras to the point where it's been banned in multiple different formats because of how powerful it is. It's just so good that after its original printing, which people thought that this was a bulk uncommon and were leaving them on draft tables after Champions of Kamigawa drafts, today it's worth upwards of $20, $30, $40, $50 a piece, depending on how popular or how in demand it is over the past couple of years. Sensei's Divining Top is a card that has definitely outsized its initial popularity and usefulness and grown into a monster, the likes of which I'm not sure we've ever seen. This might be the sleeper of all sleepers. It was just so underrated and then just has been an explosive piece of Magic for the last 10 years. Sensei's Divining Top is a 1-mana artifact originally from the aforementioned and much maligned Champions of Kamigawa. Pay a colorless and : look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them back in any order. Tap : draw a card, then put Sensei's Divining Top on top of its owner's library. This card was banned for multiple reasons from multiple different formats. It was banned on the original ban list from Modern because it was too powerful. It was banned in Old Extended because rounds were taking too long. It was legal. It was legal in Extended for a while, however, and it was a important part of Remy Fortier's Pro Tour Valencia winning deck that I recall being called Chase Rare Control. I'm seeing it listed here as like Top Goif, which sounds stupid, but it had all the, it had Tarmogoyf and Dark Confidant and Venser and Chromox and a bunch of other chase rares. And oh, by the way, also this little dinky uncommon alongside the likes of which of Umezawa's Jite, and Counterbalance and all of these other super powerful. Oh, and by the way, Counterbalance, that combo with Sensei's Divining Top, as soon as Counterbalance was printed, creating Counter Top, which created miracles in Legacy and obviously Countertop in Standard, then Extended for a while. Uber powerful, extremely potent, became a masterpiece, or not a masterpiece, became a From the Vault Exiled thing, and then was in Eternal Masters. Just an extremely powerful card, extremely potent, and super memorable.
I mean, because the top likes to do things.
Right? You let the top do what they want.
The top likes to do things. That's right.
Top does things, and you can't stop the top. Because since the Divining Top, I mean, look, it kind of came out, it's like if you were a great band and you came out when like the Beatles just showed up on the Ed Sullivan show. No matter how good you are, no one's going to care because it's just about the Beatles. So if affinity is happening and this insanely sweet, powerful card shows up, it doesn't matter how insanely sweet and powerful it is. You ain't being better than affinity. You're not. So it took that entire deck had to die. There had to be more cards come out. It had to kind of go through these phases, and people would go like, wait a minute, that card's actually terrific. And then they started playing it more and more. And then, of course, Counterbalance showed up and the whole game changed, because at that point, with Counterbalance and Sensei's Divining Top, you will counter almost everything. Well, you'll counter everything that's 1 mana cost if you'd like, by putting it on top. But otherwise, you manipulate your library. It's perfect for Dark Confidant for the same reason. This thing it just ended up being way too dumb for what I think it was supposed to be, which was sort of like a dinky artifact. It was like this dinky artifact is going to run formats, and that sucks. Yeah, and now it's banned in Modern and Legacy, as it should be. That's
absolutely it.
Aaron, what's your number 2?
My number 2 was created to be unplayable. It was essentially made to be bad. I'm under the impression that it was widely ignored when it first came out. And then eventually people kind of got hip to it. And if you ask the people who were around when the card came out, or the people who designed it, they would call this card a success. They would say they did a good job. But this card is the enabler for busted things. And according to my research, the card really busted out during Pro Tour Rome, when it was used to fuel Tolarian Academy, and also used as a mana accelerant with Time Spiral on the stack. And that's really where this card sort of gets its fame and its infamy from, is being able to shenanigans with holding priority, abusing the stack and things like that. And the drawback, when in ideal circumstances, is not necessarily a drawback. I have done so many ridiculous things with this card. My number 2 is Lion's Eye Diamond. Yes. So Lion's Eye Diamond is a 0-cost converted mana cost. Sacrifice Lion's Eye Diamond, discard your hand. Why would you want to do that? Like, that's terrible. Add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. The Gather entry on this is very interesting. The Vintage Masters version says activate this ability only anytime you could cast an instant. And then sometimes in Gather, in the rulings portion, they have little snarky comments. Under this one, it says the ability is a mana ability, so it is activated and resolves as a mana ability, but it can only be activated when you can cast an instant. Yes, this is weird. That's what it actually says. So this card is fantastic in these Storm decks. It goes very well with Infernal Tutor. So you want to be Hellbent. What's the best way to do that? You crack Lion's Eye Diamond, you cast Infernal Tutor, hold priority, crack Lion's Eye Diamond, get 3 mana, 3 red mana for something like Past in Flames, or 3 black mana for an Ad Nauseam. This card is fantastic also in the Dredge decks. We don't care if we dump our hands. This is fine. And so Christmas Land is sort of you cast Faithless Looting, hold priority, crack 3 red, and you're off to the races. Being able to do things with Street Wraith also, too. A Street Wraith, hold priority, crack Diamond, and you just start dredging. And so this is a fantastic card if you know what to do with it. They're crazy expensive right now, which makes me very sad. I was able to get mine at 50 a piece, and believe me, I was indignant about that. But I just find it fascinating that a card was made to be bad has blossomed into this enabler of really ridiculous strategies. Restricted in Vintage, which I think is hilarious, because I come from Legacy where 4 is fine. And I remember when I was trying to play Fate Stitcher Dredge, I didn't have a Lotus, obviously, but I was like, I'll just use 4 Lion's Eyes. It's fine. And Magic Online gave me that yellow yield sign, and I was like, why isn't the deck working? Oh, it's restricted. The card is great. I have a lot of fond memories of this card.
I have a memory of this card of throwing one away. I kid you not. Back in the day. They were worth nothing.
Oh, no.
They were worth nothing. When this showed up in Mirage, it was worse than nothing. This was worse than a bulk rare. People didn't even understand why this card even existed, why they even bothered to put the words on the card. It was so bad.
People were commenting in our chat. A lot of folks were like, Lion's Eye Diamond is the definition of a sleeper. And my definition of a sleeper was something that like came out and then exploded on the scene a couple months later. Right. This like Rip Van Winkle slept for decades before it exploded up to, what is it now, $150 a piece?
It's on the reserve list.
Just an it's on the reserve list. Great. Just an absurd card. And I personally have definitely had that Lion's Eye Diamond on the stack moment
Belcher?
with Belcher. Painter Grindstone obviously uses a copy, but in the cube I've definitely used it with things like Time Twister and Time Spiral and Yawgmoth's Will, and boy, holding priority, hold that control button on Magic Online. Nothing feels better. Oh, it makes me feel so good.
The card is just straight busted. Yeah. Again, back in the day, you know, I had so many boxes of Mirage. You would beg the store owner, please don't give me Mirage. It's worth like nothing, please. And here we are with a $130 card in it.
Quick shout out to Master of Magic the Gathering that very few people have probably ever heard of, Brian Hacker, who at that Pro Tour Rome event, it's commonly referred to as the most broken Pro Tour of all time. There was nothing but combo decks and like a couple of like anti-combo decks that tried to fight against the tide of chaos. The Pro Tour was, of course, won by Tommy Hovey, who played Academy, but 2 of the top 4 were high tide decks. There was another Academy and Lauer Potents in the top 8, and then like some dinky, weenie decks that had counter spells and like Solteri Priests. Yeah, Disruption in like the Boros decks that Oli Rade played. But there was no coverage. There were no deck lists published, and a lot of people said that the most busted deck that was at that Pro Tour was probably Brian Hacker's deck that utilized Gusta's Scepter.
Wow.
So if you can tell me what Gusta's Scepter deck.
Scepter.
If you can tell me what Gusta's Scepter does, why do you know what Gusta's Scepter does?
No.
But basically it allowed himself to hide cards underneath it. It like taps to exile a card from your hand. So that your opponent couldn't make you discard things or stuff like that. And that was the most broken deck at that Pro Tour, and we didn't have any coverage of it. And recently people have sort of been digging up the Magic lore and trying to find that deck. But Brian Hacker was a true master from back in the day. This was the only Pro Tour where we could play all that broken Urza Saga stuff. So it's pretty great.
This was, and Gusta's Scepter was, again, this was another one of those weird cards from Alliances. It was rare. So you would get this as a rare. It's a 0 mana artifact that if you tap to exile a card from your hand face down, you can look at it. You tap to return a card that you exiled with it back to your hand. Okay, cool. If you lose Gusta's Scepter, all exiled cards using it go to their owner's graveyard, which is cool. Weird, and I don't really get it. And so even back in the day when I would see a card like that, I'd be like, I just don't, why are you doing that? I don't, is it just, I don't
So
get it.
the description of how that deck worked is I found this article from 2002 that says that he was able to win on turn 2, and the way that Alan Comer, another very famous Hall of Fame Magic player, said that Brian would play a Gusta's Scepter and say go on his first turn. At the end of his opponent's turn, he hid Windfall under the Scepter. On his second turn, he drew the card he was opening for, Tolarian Academy. He would play the Academy, play a bunch of artifacts, including Lion's Eye Diamond. He then sacrificed the diamond for 3 blue mana and discarded what was left in his hand, tapped the Scepter to retrieve the Windfall, and that's all he needed. His deck packed Twiddle to untap the Academy and draw a brand new hand of 7 cards, had stuff like Yogg's Will and all that other broken stuff. So that's how a turn 1 Gusta's Scepter would win on turn 2 in that format, just in case y'all were curious.
That's amazing. But that lets us turn the corner to number 1. Aaron, what is your number 1 artifact? Non-creature.
Speaking of exiling cards, this card saw a little bit of play in Standard before it was banned more quickly than any other card in the format's history. I'm still not 100% clear what this card does. Usually when someone plays it, I just kind of smile and nod. Randy Buehler developed a standard deck based around this card and the card Megrim, which was capable of a 30% first turn kill ratio. This had the distinction of receiving the beloved emergency ban, which I'm under the impression Wizards is still loath to call it that. It is restricted in Vintage. That card is just the brokenest of the broken, and I love it. My number 1's Memory Jar.
Nice.
I don't know what this does. So it's 5 colorless. You tap it to sacrifice Memory Jar. Each player exiles all cards from their hand face down and then draws 7 cards. At the beginning of the next end step, each player discards their hand and returns to their hand each card he or she exiled this way. Typically, when you are giving somebody 7 cards immediately, that usually means they're going to try to win the game. And the card is just hilarious. I'll never forget the first time I experienced this in Vintage. I didn't know about the lore of it. I didn't know about the emergency ban. I didn't know that it was so busted right out of the gate. I was just like, guys, what does this do? And they were like, hold on to your butts. And the card is just fantastic. I love everything about it. I love the story behind it. I love the art. The art is fantastic. And it's just, you can't top this. I mean, you can't.
It is one of the most busted cards ever. It says draw 7 on it. Like Wizards, like the official stance, the officials is that it was retroactively added to the ban list.
But to be fair, I mean, 5 mana is a lot of mana. Like I can understand,
sure.
I can understand them feeling like 5 we're safe. It's fine. Like,
Well,
This is also Urza's block, so nothing is safe ever.
sure.
Right. They haven't pulled that retroactively add to the ban list until they did it just recently with a little card called Felidar Guardian.
You don't get it with Tinker? Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, oops, we
Tinker,
didn't.
for sure.
We really meant to ban that. Seriously, we just forgot to write it down.
Yeah.
Because it's
Good job,
broken.
kids.
I love when I get surprised with Tinkers. Like there are times, because Tinker usually means Blightsteel. And so there have been games where like, I'm ready for a Blightsteel. Like I'll see the Tinker and be like, all right, hit me. And then they'll Tinker for Memory Jar and you're like, oh, we're not in Kansas anymore.
Oh, God. Oh,
We've gone off the reservation, everyone. This was my number 9, by the way.
Nice.
I love me a Memory Jar. It's from my favorite Magic set of all time, Urza's Legacy. I've said that many times. I remember Urza's Legacy from way back in the day. It was like right near when I started playing, and I had Memory Jar in one of my first competitive decks when I would rebuy it with Goblin Welder, because why not? Because I was a little kid that wanted more cards. Memory Jar is one of my favorite Tinker targets in Cube. It's one of my favorite cards to just cast in Cube. Because unlike a lot of the other draw 7s, you can just leave it out there and just say go and then reset it the next turn. It's so good. It's completely broken, hence Broken Jar, responsible for maybe the most broken Magic deck of all time. There's so many good memories associated with Memory Jar.
and it's literally broken in the image. Like
it is literally broken in the
broken.
image.
That's how broken this card was. They painted it broken. Ruben, what's your number 1?
My number one, now I didn't have any mana of any type throughout my top 8 until number 1. And so this number 1 will be a placeholder, as it were, to identify my love for a certain type of artifact. These artifacts, this is one of a cycle of artifacts that were a collection owned by Liana of Minarad, who was a changeling planeswalker before she gave them to Christina of the Woods and Jared Carathion during her duel with the Battle Mage, aka Ravadel. And several of these artifacts were used to activate the Mox Beacon, and it's also my namesake. So my number 1 is Mox Ruby.
Yes.
I'm number 1, everybody. So
Guys.
Mox Ruby is a 0 mana cost artifact that says tap, add 1 red mana to your mana pool. It's that simple, and it's one of the original 5 Moxen. Moxen were named such because of Moxie, I guess. That's the story that we've been told. I don't really know why it wasn't Moxie to give Moxen their name, but ever since those first 5 of Emerald, Jet, Pearl, Sapphire, and the best one, Mox Ruby. They've printed several others, such as the Diamond and Chrome Mox and Mox Opal, Jack in the Mox, Mox Lotus. There have been lots of different types of them over the years, and lots of different lore and history. You can get yourself your own Mox Ruby for about $1,200 these days. At the cheapest. And it's one of the Power 9, sitting up there representing all of the super powerful and also all of the mana producing artifacts from Magic's history.
Now, when people like to say that the power creep is too much, there's power creep in Magic and there's no getting over it and the game's spiraling out of control, you go, did they give you free land? Did they give you a free mana on turn 1? Is that a thing they did? Okay, they didn't do that? Okay, great. Because you can always say, until a basic forest, is somehow trumped by another thing, any basic land, and that's a rule that, that the R&D has stuck to, honestly, this entire time, past or the first few sets. That power creep may not be as bad as you think it is, because they're nowhere near Moxes. But
yeah, the power creep the game has, it's not so much power creep as it's just power shifted away from things as uber powerful as the Moxen, which, new players have a tough time understanding why Moxes are so powerful, but you get a free land, and land is what you need to cast all your spells. And so what's better than a free version, a version that doesn't restrict you to 1 per turn? Well, it's just a super uber powerful and fun thing that I've named myself after.
Well, for my number 1, it goes a little bit along those lines, and sometimes picks can be obvious, picks can be cliche. Sometimes you can have a card that defines your game, that defines what your game does, that defines who is excited about it, can define a certain word that whenever it's put on something creates instant crazy excitement. The fact that if you're trying to get an alpha one, you pay about $23,000.
What's that number again?
$23,000 today.
Is that a $23,000?
That's a house. That's a car. That's a child. That's
a lot.
That's a lot. And, Black Lotus is just a card that helps define Magic. It is unbelievable. There's nothing more iconic. There's nothing more well-known. There's nothing that I can just say Lotus. I can put Lotus Bloom. I can say Lotus Petal. I can say Lotus Veil. Lotus is magical. Lotus is magic to me. And it was my number 1, favorite cards of all time, because from the second I saw it, I was just in love with this thing. The Christopher Rush art, the ability, obviously the collectability, the mystique around it was just incredible. It is Magic to me, is Black Lotus. So
wow.
So that was my sort of number 1 with a bullet. Oh, we're doing this list?
Absolutely.
Black Lotus.
I remember the first time. Yeah, that was another card that, one of the fun things for me about dipping my toe into Vintage is actually getting a chance to play with these cards that have these sort of esteemed reputations like Black Lotus, and that feeling of awe of that's Black Lotus. I'm not worthy. I can't. And then, and then being able to, it's one thing to have people tell you a card is good. It's one thing to see how much it's worth, but it's another to experience it for yourself and to really, know what it's like to have a turn 1 Black Lotus. Be like, oh, here's a Jace the Mind Sculptor, turn 1. And you really start to understand it. It really puts things in perspective when you are the one doing it. And that is something I will probably never experience in paper. But, to be able to say I have been there, I think that's something everybody should be able to get to do.
Yeah, I got to play it in paper, and it's an experience in and of itself.
It's a harrowing experience. I am rarely, I'll use the term starstruck.
Yeah.
The first time I met John Finkel, I was starstruck. I was a nervous small child in a college student's body trying to keep myself together after meeting Johnny Magic. I was starstruck when I met Dave Chappelle at a comedy show in Ohio. It happens very rarely. And I don't want to equate those exactly, but I still got that same butterflies, that same maybe I'm not in the right place. When I held a gem mint Black Lotus for the first time, which today is worth, or in November of 2013, sold for $27,000, which is quite a bit. Christopher Rush, obviously. We have our Black Lotus playmats, the 3 of us, which I bought from the late Christopher Rush.
Got it right here.
Absolutely. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, bother. There it is.
Nice.
Just so, and then he did a new Black Lotus art for the new Vintage Championships in 2003. And man, it's tough to overstate how iconic Black Lotus is. It just is the most powerful, the most iconic, the most expensive, the most recognizable. It is magic.
Yeah, it's definitely the thing that, I think we all can relate to muggles, where they're the people who don't play Magic in our lives.
Right.
But whenever they hear about something, they'll usually be like, oh, that's the game you play. And I remember anytime there have been some recent stories in the news about Black Lotus and specifically how much it costs, and my Facebook wall always blows up. But that's the flower. That's from the thing you play. Yep. And it's always, the people who don't play Magic, even going into, I can remember even just traveling, you get that one Uber driver, that one Lyft driver, and they're like, that's the game with the flower and the petals, right? And that's the thing people usually go to is the Black Lotus. Yeah.
Only about 1,100 Alpha Black Lotuses exist in the world.
And that's if all of them still exist. That's
if all of them still exist.
None of them get destroyed in fires or floods, or parents threw them away, or you lost it when you were a kid, or whatever. You accidentally washed it in their jeans. Who knows? Because back in the day, people just carried around their decks in plastic bags, and they played on sidewalks. They played on raw, rough sidewalk.
And even your sidewalk Black Lotus that's been beat to crap and possibly torn in half with a cigarette burn in it is probably worth over several $1,000s.
Yeah, no matter what. So
I would say that over 50% of Magic tattoos are of a Black Lotus or the Magic the Gathering back. It's just so ubiquitous, and for a card that very few people have even seen or held in real life. Also, it's tough to overstate exactly how important Black Lotus is.
So that was our top 10 non-creature artifact cards. You will see them on the screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Erins List, and Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we didn't talk about, and we'll select our favorite to win a $50 gift certificate for CoolStuffInc.com. So make them luxurious, okay? Make them shine.
Luxuriant.
Luxuriant, yes. So luxuriant.
Luxurious would be covered in gems. This is luxuriant. Luxuriant.
These words don't mean what you think they mean. Right. But that said, before we go, I want to thank my co-host. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ruben.
Thank you.
And we're going to move on here to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com, our co-sponsor, CardHoarder.com, my co-hosts, Aaron Campbell and Ruben Bressler. You guys for watching. I hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Visit our website at MagicMikesPodcast.com that exists thanks to our Patreon supporters. Or follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at Twitch.tv/MagicMikes, on Twitter at MagicMikesCast, on Reddit at Reddit.com/r/MagicMikes, and on Facebook at Facebook.com/MagicMikes. Talk to us privately at MagicMikesPodcast@gmail.com. Follow the audio-only podcast at MagicMikesPodcast.libsyn.com, or find us on iTunes, or join us here next week for another top 10 episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.